This conference will now be recorded.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Digital Law Podcast, brought to you by Digital Law and produced by Anson Evaluate. As a bit of background, we're a law firm that works solely on technology, cybersecurity, and legal issues. In each episode, we look at stories in the law relating to digital technology from around the world, with an emphasis on data protection and cybersecurity. I'm Amelia Davies, an apprentice solicitor at Digital Law UK, and I'm joined by my colleague Peter Wright, and we're just going to be running through some news stories that have been coming up this week. So I will pass over to Peter to introduce himself, and then we will get started.
Thanks, Amelia. My name is Peter. I'm a solicitor and the managing director at Digital Law. And you'd think in August, silly season, not too many stories, but
Well, it's September now.
Well, yeah, we've had lots of stuff throughout August, and it's kept going. So we can still, in our episode here from the 1st of September, talk about some of the other things that have been happening over the course of the last week.
Thanks, Peter. So, the last couple of weeks, there's been a lot of doom and gloom, and I'd like to say this is going to be, any different, but quite frankly, we're going to be kicking off with something fairly scary. But then again, it could also be laughable in.
But when you say doom and gloom, is that just the weather, or? Yeah.
Well, yeah. You can barely look outside our office window today and see the car park, let alone anything else.
Yes.
All right, so our first story of the day is looking at intelligence staff putting sensitive details on LinkedIn despite spy risks. So, British officials who have worked in top secret areas are still putting sensitive details, including their security clearance levels, on LinkedIn despite warnings about being targeted by hostile states. So specifically here, the Times found LinkedIn profiles in which individuals offered details of their work for intelligence agencies and other sensitive security jobs. And some said on public profiles that they have been involved in covert and counter-terrorism work, while others named secretive units involved in sensitive military operations, including agent handling. We're not off to a great start there, are we? I mean, you talk about common sense. Really not that common, clearly, because they've been working in confidential areas, but throwing these things around.
Well, yes and no. So it looks like here what's happened is a intelligence operative in China, mainland China, possibly even based in Beijing, has been going onto LinkedIn, setting up a fake profile. So going into that sort of idea of catfishing, where the place where they say they work, their qualifications, their name, the picture, profile picture, etc., is all fake. I think in one instance they'd taken just a general sort of piece of clip art and said that was the picture of the person. In another, they've just stolen someone else's profile picture. So some poor person who nothing to do with Chinese intelligence suddenly thought that they were, they've had their picture used and their identity stolen. That's not very nice. But then, so this fake profile has been set up, and then this operative has been contacting people in security services, people in academia, people in think tanks that are involved in thinking about security and international relations and defense and all these sorts of things. And it's been the case that this has meant they've been connecting. And this is, first of all, this is the reason why you should never connect on LinkedIn to someone that you don't know. Even if they do send you a nice connection message saying, "Hi there, I'd like to connect," that doesn't mean they're necessarily genuine. The fact that they had thousands of connections, doesn't necessarily mean that they are genuine either. And certainly that's what I think this individual used to try and make it look as though their profile was legitimate. But they'd then connect, they'd have a conversation around, you're very experienced in blah, blah, blah. Can you do a report for us? They'd very often pay quite good money to get a report that might not necessarily even be classified information in the sort of traditional top secret, this does not go, need to know basis, secret squirrel MI6 sort of thing. It's just giving an insight to Chinese intelligence in terms of the way things are considered, thought about, how strategies are followed. So it wouldn't necessarily mean, referring to some covert program or covert scheme or covert individuals. They were just looking for broad brush intelligence. So at the very lowest level, it would be, can you, produce a report for us? Can you introduce me to someone? Potentially even, can you get on a plane and come out to China and meet me and some colleagues? And one of the people involved in sort of breaking the story in the Times was saying, well, you wouldn't want to go out to China because then what potentially happens? Could it be that you could be compromised in some way? It could, for example, be a bit of a honey trap where you'd be photographed in a compromising situation or recorded, in potentially accepting a loan or a bribe, which would put you in contravention of the UK's security legislation. We've now replaced the old Official Secrets Act, which is the thing about sort of official information and intelligence, with a new Security Act, which is, again, very far-reaching powers and a very broad definition in terms of the things that you could potentially be convicted for. So there's that threat, or there's the old-fashioned From Russia with Love thing, where they just picture you and they find some compromising video or pictures of you in bed with someone, or in a similarly compromising situation, and then say, we've got this on you, now you're our asset, you're going to do X, Y, Z for us. So none of this is very good, unfortunately. The thing is that the way intelligence used to work is you'd have operatives embedded in the country that they were looking to gain the information on, and weird drops in park benches and
Very James Bond.
I hear the weather is very cold in Moscow at this time of year, and the code words and all that. That's what you would do to have your operatives embedded in the country. And now, thanks to things like LinkedIn, you don't need to do that. You can do it from behind your desk in Beijing. What's cheaper?
Which sounds perfect, but the trouble is we're talking about a very much one-way spy system. So in terms of, obviously, this individual is able to gather information on the Western Front. We cannot, however, do this back because there is not the same level of apps. There is no LinkedIn.
Yes, they've been very sensible and banned it.
Well, yes. And so therefore it's not a two-way street. It is very much this one-way, easily, you can spy on the West.
Yeah.
Minimal effort and jobs are good.
Yeah. I mean, they don't even have TikTok in China, despite the fact it's seen as a Chinese app.
Wow.
They basically say you can only have half an hour of it, and all the videos are sort of motivational and educational, not just full of influencers and cats and things. So I've got a very skewed view of what's on TikTok there, but there you go. So let's have, you might be listening and saying, well, I'm not potentially at risk of being spied on by the Chinese. Well, yeah, but this shows the fact that for years now, the UK National Cybersecurity Centre has been saying that LinkedIn is a welcome mat for hackers, because it tells you, as a hacker, lots of information about an individual. It will give you everything from job title, where they are, what they do. Classically, they've even done this to work out where a organization's defenses are online. So if you can go and find the compliance officer or head of IT or head of information security or chief information security officer, whatever it may be, and they say on LinkedIn, I'm in charge of security for Big Corp, and I implemented blah, blah, blah security protocol and ISO, blah, 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 and I did this and I did that. And funnily enough, these people very often want to do that sort of thing. So sure enough, the hacker then goes, oh, they've got such and such an accreditation, or they've got such and such a platform in place. I know I now need to do this in order to circumvent that platform and get onto their system and cause damage. So the NCSC has been making that warning to organizations since before the pandemic. So i.e. back in 2020 and 2019, they were trying to get the message out on this. I think the more worrying thing in this specific scenario is that message clearly hadn't even got through to those engaged on the periphery of the security services in the UK. If you could be compromised in this way by this guy, Robin Zhang, on LinkedIn. So the takeaway from this is just be thoughtful about the information that you are sharing on LinkedIn. The apocryphal story on this, I'm afraid, is actually someone who was a bank manager in South Yorkshire, who put on there, I am the manager of blah, blah, blah bank on such and such a high street. And then the hacker worked out from that where they lived, where their commute to work was. They then just watched and work out what time of the day they end up arriving at the bank, what time of the day they then left their family at home. So all they had to do was then be at the bank at the time he went to open it up. And then they also took his family and then said, right, you're going to let us into the vault because we have your family. And that was all off the back of intelligence on LinkedIn. So do be thoughtful about the information you share online as part of your digital footprint, because you never know who's looking.
Thanks, Peter. So, kind of keeping with the idea of Chinese spies. So, Chinese spies tried to hack an influential MP's official email account around a month ago, but they were thwarted by Microsoft. So, I mean, there's a lot to unpack here given our real love for Microsoft. But Alicia Cairns, the Tory chairwoman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, who has been outspoken about China's influence, revealed that her parliamentary email was targeted. The phishing attempt was spotted by Microsoft and the offending item had been removed before it could be opened. So, I mean, we can see here that, the classic phishing attempts are still being used.
They are still being used, and let's not forget that Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign run in 2016 was compromised by Russian hackers in a similar way, basic phishing, where they targeted the Gmail account of John Podesta, who was running her campaign. He just clicked on what he thought was a Google email, and it turned out it wasn't a Google email. It was something that had been sent by the Russian hackers. It gave the Russian hackers access to the account and loads of information about Hillary Clinton. And then the hackers went and released that online to try and aid the campaign of her rival. Let's not go down the rabbit hole of what that led to. But the point is that politicians are always targets. It's not always senior ones who can be heads of state like Hillary Clinton. It can be comparatively junior ones here, such as the head of, was it the Foreign Affairs Committee that they were chair of?
Yes, precisely, chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee.
So you don't even have to be, Prime Minister or Cabinet Secretary. You could just be a comparatively minor MP. But in the same way, you've got civil servants across government who would be targeted in the same way. And sometimes they're interested in finding out about not just people who work in public sector, it could be, if you're involved in, chairing or running or governing an organisation, or involved in an organisation's IT, for example, or, you're part of a big bank or another key part of infrastructure. It turns out that you are quite a juicy target to foreign intelligence. So the next time you get that attempted phishing email, don't think, oh, this is just dodgy hackers. You never know where it might have come from. Either way, the takeaway from this is, as always, have good security in place to try and block these sorts of things anyway. But also you need to have regular training so that you know what sort of things to spot as a user of email, and even as someone who might be receiving covert approaches on LinkedIn, as per the earlier story. So when should you refuse that LinkedIn connection request, or when should you refuse to connect to someone on Facebook or Instagram? These are real things you do need to think about now in order to protect your digital security online.
I know that here we've specifically focused on kind of social media and email, but it is also just as important if you receive a phishing link via text message, SMS,
Yes.
or any other means of communication. So I know myself, over the weekend, I received some slightly random link out of the blue. I was like, crikey, this is no one I know. And so I very promptly reported it, because that is something that you can do with SMS messages, is you can report the message and the number it came from, if you can see the number, and you can report it to your mobile phone provider, which can then aid, other people being stopped.
Yes, and it's absolutely key to do that, to spot it. Also, even if it's a existing connection or an existing person that you might know on a social network, if there is even a change in the tone of voice in the message that they might send you, that could be indicative of the fact that they've been hacked. So on more than one occasion, I've received purported messages, as I'm sure most of the people listening have, where it's supposed to come from a friend or family member, and you thought, that just doesn't sound quite right. So just be mindful of that if the sort of tone, the nature of the thing they're asking, etc., changes, because it could be the case that then that profile's been hacked and the hacker is just then thinking, I've now got this person's personal data. Can I now do the same trick on their long list of connections? So unfortunately, it's always a matter of you can't trust anyone online, really, can you?
Oh, that's uplifting, isn't it?
Isn't it?
Moving on to another very uplifting story. So, a high school has had its IT systems hacked, and they have been subject to a cyber attack. So, Debenham High School near Stowmarket in Suffolk said all its computer facilities were offline as a result of the hacking. In a letter to parents, the head said police had been informed and there was no evidence that any data had been compromised. The school said it is working to restore the systems before the new school term started. I mean, what a great start to the school year that is.
Yes, and the reason we just wanted to refer to this is, yeah, something to think about with, of course, a lot of pupils who have left schools and starting new schools this September. Is to just think about how the personal data of pupils is being used. We as a firm are often contacted by concerned parents who've seen what they think is a data protection breach. And in some instances, they're right, and it is a data protection breach, but the school hasn't reported it. So we just wanted to flag this up just to say, just be mindful of and think about the basics being followed when it comes to the protection of personal data in schools, in particular when it comes to, of course, the data about pupils. Because not just should schools be concerned about everything under in terms of what the Information Commissioner says, the definition of child is someone below the age of 13, but also the fact that they have responsibilities around safeguarding, etc. So they really should be keeping that sort of information under lock and key in terms of the pupils, but also their parents, because the information about the parents reveals where the pupils live. So it is all information that should be looked after very carefully.
Thanks, Peter. So moving on to our next hack, and I mean, well, we've got schools that clearly can't quite meet the criteria, and now we've got the Met Police. So the Metropolitan Police is investigating a possible data breach after unauthorized access was gained to the systems of one of its suppliers. The force said that the company held names, ranks, photos, vetting levels, and pay numbers for officers and staff and it has been working to understand what data, if any, has been accessed. It says it's also taken some additional security measures. So, I mean, this is fairly interesting given the stories we've covered in recent weeks in terms of other breaches throughout the police force, haven't we?
Yeah, so this is, a police force hack of the week, unfortunately. And it's the big one, it's the Met. And we are again talking about, I think, quite a large volume of personal data, and it's information about the police themselves. And we've already seen how that became a problem in Northern Ireland, where it was felt to have increased the risk that officers over there face on a daily basis. So it's likely to be the same case here as well. And then I think also, interestingly, I think the Times reported as part of the same story, South Yorkshire Police have been hacked as well.
Yes, so they have been experiencing a significant and unexplained reduction in data such as body cam footage stored on its systems, a loss which could affect some 69 cases. Isn't that just fabulous? So
it is.
Body cam footage, that could be evidence, maybe?
It's information that could exonerate someone or could convict someone, so it's a concern. And of course now, a lot of officers when they're out are recording these information by body cam, so it can be useful evidence in anything that happens, as well as evidence used with regards to disproving allegations around police conduct. So you can see why you'd want to wear a body cam and why you'd want to have this footage, but of course that means you're going to have huge volumes of this data around at any one time, and of course an increasing volume of it every day will produce thousands more hours that have to be securely looked after, because they could include when you're going into people's home addresses, when you're speaking to people in the street, when you're investigating crimes, when you're speaking to witnesses. So by definition, that's all going to be quite confidential, incredibly important information, and indeed, as you say, evidence. I think let's be positive here. The good thing is that this is something where the police have appreciated the risk and have self-reported it within the 72 hours, by the looks of it, to the Information Commissioner. So they're taking it seriously, they're reporting it to the ICO, they'll be working with the regulator, and I'm sure they'll be wanting to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
The point to flag here as well is the fact that it was a system of one of its suppliers. So we're not necessarily immediately talking about the Met Police, we're talking about the supplier itself. Yeah. And this is very interesting because often we have clients that don't quite fully understand the idea of supply chain attacks. Yes. And Peter, I'm sure you can explain in more detail why this is so important.
Yeah, so sometimes it could be the case that, as an organisation, you're wanting to deliver a service and you're going to rely on a particular piece of kit to, for example, anything from, say, a chat bot to a customer services supplier. It'll do some of the legwork there, all the way through to a payment provider, or loads of different sub providers and suppliers can be relied on when you're then delivering a service, either online or in a more traditional business. The thing is to make sure that whatever systems you are using, you can rely on the fact that they are compliant. And sometimes we find when we're speaking to clients, they'll go, well, loads of other people are using this, why can't we? To which sometimes the answer is, well, you're in a highly regulated sector or industry, for example, finance, medicine, pharmaceuticals, banking, insurance, security. You get the idea. If you have duties on you in terms of security, data, confidentiality, then you're going to want to make sure the systems you are using are sufficiently robust and secure, and not just to satisfy yourself, but actually to be able to document that and show either you've got the documents from, in terms of policies and procedures, that supplier is following that show that they are demonstrating compliance, or it could be you have to ask them specific questions, they send you specific answers, and that serves as the evidence you can then use to say internally, we have satisfied ourselves that this platform system is compliant. But it means you have to jump through those hoops. Just because a platform might be used by another company is not evidence that that platform is fine. Just because it's like, such and such a bank uses this platform, therefore it should be fine. No, you have to satisfy this yourself, because if there is then a problem, the ICO isn't going to go, oh, well, yeah, well, that bank said it was fine, so therefore you're fine. We aren't worried about the fact it was then hacked and all your data was lost. You have to yourself, as a data controller, satisfy this, that you've then done the due diligence that you should be using a system. So just because it looks like a good system and it's got great usability and wonderful functions, doesn't necessarily mean that it really fully complies from a legal and regulatory standpoint.
Thanks, Peter. So moving on to our next story and kind of moving away from the hacks just for a little bit, we are looking at Google. So Google is trialing a digital watermark to spot images made by artificial intelligence in a bid to fight disinformation. So this has been developed by DeepMind, Google's AI arm, and it will identify images generated by machines. It works by embedding changes to individual pixels in images, so watermarks are invisible to the human eye, but detectable by computers. However, there might be some problems with this, but it's a step in the right direction.
Yes, I think it should be applauded as work that has to be undertaken. Let's face it, when it comes to AI generated content, so we've got generative AI platforms, some free and some that you pay for, that are now coming out of our ears, that can make very realistic looking images, very realistic sounding audio and video. It's important that we can tell the difference between what is artificial and what is true. The problem being that you don't want artificially generated content soaring up the popularity on platforms like Instagram or X or Facebook, whereby people are then seeing these things and thinking, oh, that's true. Quick example would be those artificial images of Donald Trump being arrested outside Trump Tower from earlier this year, or the image of the Pentagon under attack, which led to a short-term crash of the stock market in the US. Don't worry, it got better once they realized it was fake. But the point is that if you have a watermark like this on the content, the algorithms in use by Meta and by X or by TikTok, for example, would know not to then promote that content, because they would know that it was fake and not to be trusted, and certainly shouldn't be propagated as sort of gospel truth and verifiable news in the same way. And the interesting thing here as well is that earlier this year I heard about an initiative whereby they were looking at putting a similar watermark into the real world content. So the idea would be this would go onto all of your digital cameras, or into the mobile phones, or into audio recorders, that would basically watermark the original content. So then platforms would see the watermarked original content and know that's safe to promote, whereas the stuff without the watermark shouldn't be promoted. So arguably, I think that by doing it this way, let's face it, if you can watermark the fake content, the AI content, it's going to be quicker and easier to introduce that sort of regulation, because you just say, right, all the platforms have to have this embedded in order to be able to operate. Whereas if you're going to watermark the original content, well, that means that you have to have thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of new cameras and phones and devices to make sure that all the new content that's produced has the requisite watermark. So this could mean that we can tell the truth from the lie in terms of this AI generated footage rather more quicker and easier than it might otherwise have been the case. So let's see this as a positive, and let's hope that this leads to us being able to spot the fake more easily.
Thanks, Peter. So moving on to our final story of the week. So, I mean, at this point, we have X Corner or Twitter Corner, whatever you want to call it, because we have been changing the names throughout the year since now that X is Twitter or Twitter is X, or who is what.
Our Lord and Saviour, Mr. Musk.
Yes. So a hacking group called Anonymous Sudan took X, formerly known as Twitter, offline in more than a dozen countries in an attempt to pressurize Elon Musk into launching his Starlink service in their country.
That'll make it work, yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Blackmail him, he responds well to that, yeah.
So X was down for more than 2 hours with thousands of users affected. The idea was to make our message reach to Elon Musk. Open Starlink in Sudan, the hackers posted on Telegram. So X is the latest victim of the gang hacking to benefit Sudan and Islam. And over several weeks of private conversations on the chat Telegram, we've spoken to the hackers about their methods and motives. And essentially, in relation to X, they flooded the servers with huge amounts of traffic to take it offline.
Okay. So, it turns out you can take X down if you want to. And this is, of course, about we'd like to have access to Starlink. Starlink is global satellite broadband. Basically, the idea is you can have a high quality internet connection for, I think, about $150 a month, and you don't need to have a hard line connection. So you can just have the little satellite dish, and you can have the information that goes up on the information that then you just end up going online by pointing the satellite dish into the right part of the sky, and you can then have a good, high quality, reliable and secure online connection, rather than having to rely on fiber optic cable sneaking its way to your house or your office, or to the router of the public place where you're using Wi-Fi, though we wouldn't recommend that, of course. So that the idea here is that you'd be able to then force Starlink to be available in Sudan. It's currently available in a lot of different countries. I think there's about 3,500 satellites in orbit. The eventual plan will be to have, I think, 4 or 5 times that up there. And these satellites sit in low Earth orbit and provide the service. It's already really popular, and Starlink is turning over billions of dollars as it is, and it's still fairly early in its sort of gestation as a vision. So, I mean, the interesting thing here is, it's trying to coerce Elon Musk. I really don't see that one working anytime soon. So Sudan's probably going to find that it hasn't got Starlink, while other countries around it do. But that's probably just the wrong approach. Slightly concerning that it was so easy, seemingly, to take X offline in a number of countries. And that's probably something they are going to have to consider if it's possible for the system to be brought down by the equivalent of a sort of organised denial of service, a distributed denial of service attack. Then they'll want to have safeguards to make sure that the system isn't quite so vulnerable in future, I'm sure.
So the kind of the last part of the article here is X has not publicly acknowledged the disruption caused, and Mr. Musk has not responded to questions to launch his satellite internet service in Sudan. I think that just sums it up there, really.
Yeah, he responds to an awful lot of things quite quickly on X. So the fact he hasn't there says it all.
So that was our last discussion for this episode. But if you would like to hear more from us, including subscribing to our newsletter, as well as receiving information about subscriber-only podcasts, webinars, and events, then please subscribe to Premium via our Patreon channel using the link in the show notes. A big thank you to Anson Evaluate for helping to produce this podcast. And if you would like to produce your own podcast or webinar, or you'd be interested to hear about Anson Evaluate services, please take a look at their website that you can find at www.ansonevaluate.com. Just a reminder, these episodes are available on our website, YouTube channel, podcast channels such as Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon and Google Podcasts, and please feel free to leave us a review. And if you do have any questions about anything that we've talked about today, please email us at admin@digitallawyuk.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope to see you again next week.